No, not a good idea, Republican Congressman Matt Salmon of Arizona. Not a good idea at all. Look, this is not 95. We're not talking about a government shutdown. We're talking about the United States of America going into default. The most powerful economy in the world, saying our political system, our system is too dysfunctional for us to reliably pay our bills. That would be anything but good for this country. If Congressman Salmon had been with me this morning, he'd understand that. This morning, I attended a briefing by the Bipartisan Policy Center on the debt ceiling. They did amazing work on this issue. They really got into the weeds on it, more so than anyone I've seen before. They were looking literally at how many checks the government sends out a month, how our payment software works. And so I want to tell you, and maybe Congressman Salmon, 5 of the things they found, because after you hear this, you're not going to want to bust through the debt ceiling. You're not going to want to do that at all. The Bipartisan Policy Center, or BPC, they project right now that the debt ceiling doomsday, really the final day for it, would happen sometime between February 15th and March 1st. Either Congress figures out the debt ceiling before then, or things get very bad very quick. First, it'll mean that the government will have to default on about 40% of our obligations, 40% of what we do gone. So let's say the government decides to pay off our debtors. They make payments for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, defense, education, and food stamps, kind of just the bare services there. Doing all that will mean defaulting on everything. And really, I mean everything else. The FBI will shut down. The people responsible for tracking down loose nuclear weapons lose their jobs. The prisons don't operate. The biomedical researchers aren't funded. The court system closes its doors. Federal Aviation Administration offline. The parks closed. Food safety inspections, they cease. No one gets tax refunds. Nobody's fixing your roads. It's bad. Second, meanwhile, too, the financial markets will go into complete chaos. U.S. government debt is, after all, supposedly the safest investment in the world. And so it's used as the benchmark for all other kinds of debt. What that means in normal language is when you buy a mortgage, your bank looks at what the government pays to borrow, and it begins your interest rate there. Then they add on top of that how risky they think you are. So if we spike the Treasury rate because nobody trusts our government anymore, that spikes credit card rates, that spikes mortgage rates, not to mention all manner of trillions and trillions of dollars of weird financial derivatives that are also benchmarked to Treasuries. The damage to the economy on that would be unbelievable, and it would occur at every level, from individuals looking for a loan to get a house to hedge funders trying to play the markets. It would be like 2008 all over again, and if we breach the ceiling for long, maybe even worse. All of what I've mentioned so far, amazingly, is actually a best-case scenario. It is what happens if we breach the debt ceiling in an orderly way. But what if it's not that simple? What if it's not orderly? That gets to the third point. The government's computerized payment system could go haywire. The federal government needs to make more than 100 million individual payments between February 15th and March 15th. 100 million. That is not done by a clerk in an office somewhere whose hand doesn't get tired. Those payments are computerized. Those computer systems are not built to stop making half of them. There is a real question as to whether the federal government could actually reprogram its software to seamlessly begin picking and choosing which bills to pay and which to ignore. And if there's a glitch, then it could be that after assuring our bondholders that we would never miss a payment to them, the government accidentally does fail to pay them, throwing financial markets into panic because they can no longer trust our word. Fourth, the consequences of breaching the debt ceiling, they don't go away. We will have done something we told the markets and the world that we would never do, not under any circumstances. The U.S. would have proven itself a riskier borrower with a more broken political system than anyone ever thought possible. The Bipartisan Policy Center, they estimate the last debt ceiling fight, it cost us $19 billion in higher borrowing costs over the next decade. And in that case, we didn't actually go over the debt ceiling. We didn't breach it. If we actually do this time, the cost will, of course, be much higher and the damage much longer lasting. The fifth and final point is, ironically, for those who want to use the debt ceiling as leverage to reduce the deficit, busting through the debt ceiling would almost certainly make our future deficits so much worse. The damage to the economy now would increase the deficit as spending goes up and tax revenues go down when the economy flags. We just saw this during the recession. And the higher borrowing costs later because nobody trusts America anymore, that would also increase the deficit as we'd be paying more to service a debt we already have than we're expected to do. So no, Congressman Salmon, it is not about time that we have a debt ceiling shutdown. It is about time we do something to make sure that never happens.